When you think of a Roman soldier, what comes to mind? Probably that classic image. Red shield, shiny armor, golden helmet, and that organized way of marching that looked almost like a military dance. And that's exactly what Rome wanted, to appear invincible, orderly, and imposing. But amidst all that shining uniformity, there were a few who completely broke the visual pattern. Instead of gold and red, they wore black, matte armor with no shine at all. And that has always intrigued historians. Why would someone in the most disciplined army in the world wear something so different? The answer might seem simple, but it holds layers of meaning. These men weren't just there to fight like the others. They had a different mission, and the color of their armor already said a lot before they even drew their swords. When you understand the reason behind it, everything starts to make much more sense, and it reveals a part of Rome that almost no one talks about. Hold on. Before we continue, I need your help. YouTube only shows this video to more people if there's a lot of interaction. In other words, without your comment, this knowledge might be buried and never reach those who need it. If this content makes sense to you, comment 1. If you disagree, comment 0 and tell me why. I want to see at least 100 comments here so YouTube knows this topic needs to be shared. So comment now and be part of this mission to uncover the secrets of ancient Rome. Now think with me. The Roman Empire was obsessed with organization. Everything was calculated, from the straight streets of the cities to the way the soldiers dressed. They had to look the same, march in the same rhythm, act like one single machine. Nothing was by accident. The red shield, for example, wasn't just for decoration. It was meant to attract attention, intimidate, and give an impression of power. The gold in the armor reflected sunlight, making the enemy feel small in front of that dazzling wall. It was part of a visual strategy. Rome wanted to dominate your eyes before the battle even started. So, when someone appeared breaking that pattern, wearing something completely off script, you knew right away there was something different, maybe even dangerous. In the middle of that sea of red shields and golden medals, imagine the shock of seeing a figure dressed in black, with no shine, almost like a living shadow on the battlefield. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't improvisation. It was intentional. These soldiers, few and discreet, showed up as exceptions within the strictest rulebook of the ancient military world. While most represented order, these seemed to represent mystery, and no one wore black in Rome for vanity. It meant something. The legionnaires themselves knew that if someone was wearing that dark armor, they weren't just anyone. There was a reason, a purpose that didn't need to be said. It was felt. These men weren't there just to march with the others. It was as if they belonged to another level, a parallel layer within the army itself. And that's why they stood out so much. Not because they spoke, but because their silence and appearance already said everything. And Rome knew how to use that like no one else. In ancient Rome, colors spoke loudly, and black in particular carried an enormous symbolic weight. It wasn't just associated with the absence of light, it was the symbol of mourning, death, the unknown. When a Roman saw someone dressed in black, their mind already linked it to something dark, serious, often even dangerous. It wasn't a neutral choice, much less an aesthetic one. Wearing black on the battlefield was almost a psychological provocation, as if saying, I come from the shadows, and I bring something you don't understand. And in an empire where everything was designed to impress, from the columns of temples to the shape of shields, the use of black was calculated, not just to scare the enemy, but also to mark territory within the army itself. It was a silent way of saying, I don't follow the same rules as you. Rome understood that sometimes true power lies in not shining, and these soldiers knew how to wield darkness as a weapon, without raising their voices or their swords. These men in black armor weren't there by chance. They weren't just different soldiers. They were soldiers with different roles, and that changes everything. While most went to the front lines, marched in formation, and followed clear orders, these men moved through the gaps. They acted where silence was more efficient than a shout. There are indications that many of them were used in night missions, ambushes, silent captures, or even as personal guards for important figures of the empire. And in those situations, shiny armor would have made them easy targets. Black, on the other hand, helped them blend in, disappear into the dark. And more than that, it served as a warning without words. That said, you're dealing with a different kind of warrior, one who didn't show up in parades but who was decisive behind the scenes. Rome knew that not every war is won in the open field. Sometimes the empire triumphed before the battle even started, with men who wore black and carried secrets along with their swords. Imagine being on the battlefield, expecting to face the Roman army everyone already knows, and suddenly, among the shining shields, dark figures emerge, cloaked in black, as if they had come out of a nightmare. It created an immediate effect on the battlefield. Fear began before the first arrow, and not just for the enemies. Even within the Roman legions, these men caused unease. They were respected, of course, but also kept at a distance. No one knew exactly what they did or how far their orders reached. Their presence was a silent message. Something serious was about to happen. Rome was a master of this type of strategy. It didn't need to shout to dominate. It only had to subtly show that it controlled even the invisible. Black in that setting wasn't just a color, it was a warning. A living shadow walking among the living. If this content makes sense to you so far, do me a favor. Give me a sign. Comment 1 down below so I know you're with me on this journey. And remember, YouTube only spreads this knowledge if there's enough interaction. If you haven't commented yet, now is the time. I want to see this video full of opinions so this topic can keep reaching more people. Rome was powerful, yes, but it also knew how to learn from its enemies. And when it came across tribes from Northern Europe or the East, it absorbed everything that could be useful, including the appearance and strategies of its foes. Some of the soldiers who wore black armor may have come from these conquered peoples, men who, after defeat, were incorporated into the Roman army as allies, mercenaries, or auxiliary troops. Many came from barbarian territories where black was common in clothing and rituals. And Rome, never foolish, took advantage of this style to create even more impact in war. Moreover, these foreign warriors brought different tactics, fought in other ways, more savage, more unpredictable, which was perfect for certain missions. Instead of forcing them to look like Romans, the empire used them as they were, dark, dangerous, and mysterious. And so, black became more than just a color. It became a weapon of war. If you've heard of gladiators, you know they weren't just fighters. They were a spectacle. But what many people forget is that the Colosseum wasn't just for entertainment. It also served as a laboratory for fear and image. And in that context, the color black was often used to create fearsome characters. Gladiators dressed in black had a different effect on the audience. They seemed invincible, inhuman, almost like spirits of death. And that aesthetic eventually leaked out of the arena. The empire began to realize that visual fear was a weapon, so why not bring it to the battlefield? It's not an exaggeration to imagine that some soldiers in black armor followed that logic. They wore the image of death, became a warning that something fatal was about to happen. They mixed the theater of the Colosseum with the brutal reality of war. And in a world where image was everything, Rome knew exactly how to use even terror as a tactic. When it comes to the soldiers in black armor, one thing stands out. Historical records about them are scarce, almost always indirect, and that in itself is curious. Rome loved documenting everything, campaigns, victories, even constructions. But about these men, almost nothing clear. Some ancient texts vaguely mention dark troops, or warriors who emerged like shadows during night attacks. Others suggest that certain groups were purposely kept secret, with limited access even within the army. And here comes a theory many scholars still defend today. These soldiers were part of special units used in missions that Rome preferred not to speak of publicly. They were, in a sense, the ghosts of the empire. They were there, they acted, they changed the course of battles, but remained between the lines of history. It's precisely in that silence that the mystery lives, and the symbolic power that still fascinates today. The truth is, Rome never did anything by accident. Every symbol, every color, every silence, it all had purpose. And when someone wore black inside that uniform army, it shouted without sound. It was a message, a presence that didn't need an announcement. These soldiers, cloaked in shadow, may not have even wanted to be remembered. And that's why they barely appear in records, because their strength was precisely in their anonymity. But the impact they made crossed centuries. Today, when we study Rome closely, we realize that the empire's power went far beyond the sword. It was in the invisible, the symbolic, the psychological, and understanding that changes everything. Now, if you want to discover just how far Rome went to hide its secrets, click the video that's appearing on your screen. But be warned, only watch if you're ready to see a side of the empire no one has dared to show you. Until now, see you there.